At Northwood High, silence was survival. When Principal Decker enforced his twisted, neat hair rule, students obeyed or paid the price. But when he called out Emily Segal, daughter of a global martial arts legend, and publicly shaved her head in front of the entire school, something shifted. The whispers of fear turned into silent rage. Emily didn't cry, she didn't scream, but her silence was a spark. And when her father walked through the school's front doors in full martial arts uniform, the walls of fear began to crack. The fluorescent lights of Northwood High's assembly hall hummed with a chilling indifference, casting a sickly yellow glow on the rows of anxious faces. A palpable dread had settled over the student body, a familiar tension whenever Principal Ron Decker announced one of his discipline inspections. It was the neat hair policy, a draconian rule that seemed to mutate with Decker's every whim, always serving as a pretext for public shaming rather than genuine order. Emily Segal, a picture of quiet dignity in the third row, felt a knot tighten in her stomach. Her dark, lustrous hair, usually a cascade of meticulously braided strands, felt like a target under Decker's piercing gaze. She had spent an hour that morning ensuring every strand was tucked, every braid perfectly aligned, a futile act of defiance against a tyrant who sought only to dominate. Principal Decker, a man whose presence filled the expansive hall with an almost suffocating authoritarianism, strode onto the stage. His bald head gleamed under the harsh lights, a stark contrast to the thick, dark hair he so rigidly demanded from his students. He clutched a pair of electric clippers, their metallic gleam sending shivers down the spines of the assembled teenagers. Order. His voice boomed, amplified by the crackling microphone, silencing the nervous whispers that had dared to ripple through the room. Today, we address a persistent defiance of school regulations, specifically the egregious violations of our hair policy. His eyes, cold and calculating, swept across the faces before him, lingering for a fraction too long on the girls with hair that dared to extend beyond a tightly pulled ponytail. Emily's heart pounded against her ribs. She was a well-behaved student, her grades impeccable, her conduct exemplary. Yet, she knew that in Decker's twisted sense of justice, even the slightest deviation from his arbitrary rules could be deemed a catastrophic offense. Her family, with their unique heritage and her father's demanding global schedule, had always emphasized self-discipline and respect. Emily embodied these values, but Decker seemed to perceive her quiet strength as a challenge to his absolute authority. Emily Segal. Decker's voice sliced through the silence like a sharp blade. The sound reverberated through the hall, echoing off the high ceilings. Emily flinched, her hands instinctively clutching the edge of her seat. All eyes, 100 pairs of them, swiveled to her. Some were filled with pity, others with a detached curiosity, a few with the morbid fascination of onlookers at a spectacle. Her best friend, Sarah, seated beside her, gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Emily could feel the heat rising in her cheeks, a blush of mortification that spread quickly across her face. "Step forward, Miss Segal," Decker commanded, his voice dripping with mock politeness. Emily rose, her legs feeling like lead. Each step toward the stage was an exercise in pure willpower, a walk of shame under the collective gaze of her peers. The stage, with its unforgiving spotlight, seemed to magnify her vulnerability. She stood before Decker, her chin held high, a silent testament to her unwavering spirit despite the terror coiling in her stomach. She refused to meet his gaze, focusing instead on a distant point beyond him, striving to project in composure she didn't feel. Decker circled her, a predator assessing its prey. "Miss Segal," he began, his voice now a low, theatrical purr. "Your hair, while neatly braided, it demonstrates an unacceptable fullness, a clear defiance of the spirit of our neat hair policy, which prioritizes conformity and ease of inspection." He paused, letting his words hang in the air, a grotesque pronouncement of a minor detail elevated to a capital offense. A collective murmur rippled through the student body, Several teachers, positioned along the side aisles, shifted uncomfortably, their faces etched with a mix of disapproval and helplessness. They were paid to enforce Decker's rules, even the most absurd ones, and challenging him meant risking their own careers. As a demonstration of consequences, Decker continued, holding up the clippers, their blades glinting menacingly. And to ensure full compliance with the spirit of our regulations, we will rectify this exuberance. Emily's breath hitched. Her eyes widened, a flicker of raw fear finally breaking through her composure. She knew what was coming. This wasn't about neatness. It was about control, about breaking spirits, about teaching a lesson through public humiliation. Before Emily could react, before a single protest could escape her lips, Decker reached out. The cold metal of the clippers touched her scalp, sending a jolt through her. The whirring sound, surprisingly loud in the cavernous hall, filled her ears, a horrifying prelude to the act. A thick lock of her dark hair, meticulously braided, fell silently to the stage floor. A stark, dark coil against the dusty wood, then another, and another. Each snip was a blow, a violent assault on her identity, on her sense of self. Tears welled in her eyes, hot and stinging, but she fiercely blinked them back. She would not give him the satisfaction of seeing her cry. The students in the hall watched in stunned silence. A mixture of shock and quiet outrage etched on their faces. Some averted their gaze, unable to bear the sight. Others stared, wide-eyed, a silent testament to the principal's tyrannical power. Sarah, in the audience, had buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with suppressed sobs. The teachers remained motionless, their faces carefully blank, their silence a chilling complicity. The sound of the clippers continued its relentless assault, reducing Emily's beautiful, long hair to an uneven, jagged mess. Patches of her scalp were exposed, raw and vulnerable. When Decker finally stepped back, a cruel, satisfied smirk played on his lips. He held up a handful of Emily's shorn hair, a trophy of his dominance, before letting it fall to the floor in a theatrical gesture. The whirring of the clippers ceased, leaving an echoing silence in the vast hall, broken only by Emily's ragged breathing. Her head felt unnaturally light, the cool air on her exposed scalp a constant reminder of the violation. She stood there, trembling, her shoulders slumped, her once proud bearing diminished. Her eyes, when she finally looked up, were not filled with tears, but with a searing, quiet fury that promised a reckoning. The humiliation was complete, but something new, something dangerous, had awakened within her. She was publicly hurt, but the deep wound inflicted on her spirit would not easily heal, nor would it be easily forgotten. The injustice of the moment hung heavy in the air. A volatile charge waiting for a spark, the cold metal on Emily's scalp, the whir of the clippers, and the crushing weight of 100 stares were not just immediate sensations. They were echoes, reverberations of a deeply buried past. As Principal Decker dropped her shorn hair like discarded refuse, Emily's mind, in a desperate act of self-preservation, recoiled into a memory, a phantom pain that clarified the steel she was now trying to summon. This wasn't the first time an authoritarian figure had used her body, her appearance, as a canvas for their twisted display of power. This wasn't the first time she had been forced to endure humiliation in silence. Years ago, a fragile, wide-eyed 8-year-old Emily had been sent to a traditional Japanese boarding school. Her father, Steven Seagal, was deep in a grueling, isolated training regimen, perfecting his craft in distant dojos. Her mother, believing in the virtues of strict discipline and ancient wisdom, had enrolled Emily, thinking the rigid structure would provide stability in her father's frequent absences. The school, nestled amongst stoic mountains, was a bastion of ancient traditions, where individual expression was viewed with suspicion and conformity was the highest virtue. It was there, amidst the scent of tatami mats and the rhythmic chants of morning exercises, that Emily first encountered the concept of disciplinary correction for the greater good, a phrase that, even then, felt chillingly synonymous with arbitrary punishment. The headmistress, a gaunt woman named Akani, ruled with an unyielding grip, her face a perpetual mask of austere disapproval. Akani's eyes missed nothing, and her judgments were swift and absolute. Emily, then a quiet child prone to solitary contemplation, had found solace in painting. She wasn't just drawing, she was attempting to capture the vibrant, wild beauty of the Cretanese landscape that lay beyond the school's high walls, a stark contrast to the muted tones of her regimented life. Her artwork, a burst of color and freedom, was deemed an unacceptable deviation from the prescribed curriculum, an act of rebellion against the school's rigid artistic guidelines. One afternoon, Akani discovered Emily's sketchbook hidden beneath her futon. The headmistress's eyes, usually as still as pond water, flared with a cold fury. Without a word, Akane seized the sketchbook, its pages filled with Emily's innocent attempts at capturing nature's wildness. She marched Emily, not to her office, but to the center of the serene, meticulously raked Zen garden where the entire student body was engaged in silent meditation. The silence, usually a balm, now felt oppressive, amplifying every beat of Emily's terrified heart. Akane held up the offending sketchbook, its vibrant colors an ironic mockery in the stark, ordered garden. Her voice, usually a hushed whisper, boomed with unexpected volume. This child, Emily Segal, has engaged in an act of artistic indiscipline. Her deviation from the collective spirit of learning must be corrected, for the harmony of the school depends on absolute adherence. Emily's small body trembled, her eyes darting between the unreadable faces of her peers and the unyielding gaze of Akane. She wanted to scream, to defend her innocent joy, but the words choked in her throat. The pervasive culture of silence, the ingrained fear of challenging authority, held her captive. Then, Akane produced a small, silver calligraphy knife, its blade glinting in the sunlight. With a deliberate, almost ritualistic movement, she began to slice through the pages of Emily's sketchbook. Each cut was precise, methodical, a calculated desecration of Emily's nascent artistic soul. The sound of tearing paper, normally so innocuous, was amplified into a grotesque ripping sound in the profound silence of the garden. Emily watched, horrified, as landscapes blurred into fragmented chaos, portraits of vibrant birds reduced to scraps, and dreams of blossoming flowers mutilated into unrecognizable shapes. Tears welled in her eyes, hot and insistent, but she refused to let them fall. Crying, she had learned, only fueled the tormentor. Showing weakness was an invitation for further cruelty. She clutched her small hands, digging her nails into her palms, a silent act of defiance against the agony blooming in her chest when the last page was shredded. Akane scattered the confetti of ruined art onto the perfectly raked gravel, a stark contrast of color and chaos against the pristine white stones. "Let this be a lesson," Akane declared, her voice resonating with chilling finality. "That individualistic pursuits, when they defy communal order, will be dismantled. Harmony requires sacrifice." Emily stood there, her body rigid, a small, humiliated figure amidst the silent, unmoving statues of her peers. The incident had burned itself into her memory, not just as a moment of pain, but as a defining lesson in the face of overwhelming, arbitrary power. Enduring in silence was often the only path to survival. It taught her that resistance could be met with intensified suffering, and that a quiet inner strength was sometimes the only shield one could deploy. This was the reason she hadn't screamed in Northwood High's assembly hall. This was why she had bitten back her tears. She had learned, through bitter experience, to endure, to internalize the pain, and to wait for a moment that might truly matter. The memory of Akane's cold, triumphant gaze was a mirror to Decker's, and in that moment, the seeds of a deeper, more profound defiance were sown, not in an outburst, but in a simmering, controlled fury. The days following the assembly were a stark, brutal landscape for Emily. The physical act of having her hair shorn was a wound that refused to scab over, a constant, abrasive reminder of her public humiliation. But the psychological scarring ran deeper, manifesting in the chilling silence that now accompanied her every movement through the school halls. Her once vibrant aura was dimmed, replaced by a quiet vulnerability that seemed to invite the covert discrimination Principal Decker had implicitly endorsed. The other students, once her cheerful peers, now navigated a careful perimeter around her. Some offered furtive glances of pity, quickly averted as if eye contact itself was a transgression. Others, those who had always thrived in the shadow of authority, mimicked Decker's disdain, their whispers carrying the venom of judgment. Emily walked through the labyrinthine corridors, her head held marginally lower than before, the exposed patches of her scalp a raw, visible testament to her violated autonomy. The school, Northwood High, had always been a place of learning, but now it felt less like an institution of education and more like a carefully constructed panopticon, with Principal Decker as its omnipresent, unblinking eye. His hair policy had merely been the most overt expression of his reign of terror. In the aftermath of Emily's public shaming, Decker tightened his grip, the air in the school growing thick with oppressive conformity. New minor rules materialized daily, posted on bulletin boards with grim finality, stricter uniform inspections, mandatory demeanor checks during lunch, even a ban on excessive laughter in common areas. Each new decree was a subtle flex of his power, a silent message to the student body. This could be you. Teachers, already subservient to Decker's autocratic rule, became even more cautious. In class, Emily noticed a chilling shift. Her typically engaged instructors now avoided her gaze, their questions directed to other students, their praise, once freely given, now conspicuously absent. Mr. Harrison, her history teacher, who had once lauded her incisive analytical skills, now hurried past her desk, his face a mask of strained neutrality. During a literature discussion, when Emily raised her hand to offer an insightful interpretation, Mrs. Albright, her English teacher, merely nodded curtly and called on another student. It was a subtle, insidious form of ostracization, designed not to overtly punish, but to isolate, to make her feel like an anomaly, a pariah in the very environment where she had once excelled. The message was clear, acknowledging Emily was acknowledging a challenge to Decker. And no one dared to risk the principal's wrath. The systemic abuse extended beyond Emily. Other students, previously rebellious or outspoken, had retreated into their shells, their voices muted, their spirits visibly dampened. A quiet artist named Leo, known for his vibrant sketches on the margins of his notebooks, now only drew in shades of gray, his once expressive eyes dulled by fear. A boisterous athlete, Marcus, who used to fill the cafeteria with his booming laughter, now ate in somber silence, his energy visibly sapped. Decker had cultivated an atmosphere where individual expression was suffocated, and fear was the primary currency. His arbitrary punishments, often disproportionate and demeaning, were not about discipline, they were about control, about crushing dissent and fostering a pervasive sense of helplessness. The Northwood High campus, once bustling with youthful exuberance, now hummed with a low, anxious thrum. Emily, despite her internal turmoil, attempted to maintain a semblance of normalcy. She attended her classes, completed her assignments with the same meticulous dedication, and tried to engage with her few remaining friends, Sarah chief among them. But the effort was exhausting. Every glance, every whispered comment, every subtle snub was a fresh prick to her wounded pride. She found herself instinctively touching her short, uneven hair, a gesture born of self-consciousness, a constant reminder of the indignity, the casual cruelty of some students, emboldened by Decker's actions, was particularly sharp. During a science lab, a group of popular girls whispered and giggled, casting pointed glances at her exposed scalp. "She looks like a boy now," one sneered, loud enough for Emily to hear. Maybe she'll finally learn to follow the rules. The words were like tiny cuts, each one eroding her resolve. Yet, beneath the veneer of quiet endurance, a slow, relentless burn began to ignite within Emily. The Japanese school had taught her silence as a shield, but this new assault, so public and so sustained, was chipping away at that protective layer. The humiliation she had suffered was not a private shame. It was a public spectacle, and its reverberations were infecting every corner of her life. She saw the fear in her classmates' eyes, the resignation in her teacher's slumped shoulders, and it wasn't just her own pain she felt anymore. It was the collective anguish of a school held captive by a tyrant. She longed for the sanctuary of her home, for her father's reassuring presence. But Stephen was still on his international mission. A world away, unaware of the quiet reign of terror gripping Northwood High, the knowledge that he was absent, that she was truly alone in this oppressive environment, fueled both her despair and a nascent, dangerous fury. Living normally was no longer an option when every aspect of her existence was a reminder of her violated dignity and the pervasive injustice that festered openly in her school. The endurance born of past trauma was beginning to crack, revealing a core of steel that demanded more than just silent suffering. The pressure was building, and the quiet girl who had always chosen peace was slowly, inexorably, being pushed toward a confrontation. The oppressive silence of Northwood High became a suffocating shroud for Emily. Each day was a grinding repetition of subtle slights and veiled accusations, a slow erosion of her spirit. Yet, within this suffocating atmosphere, a tiny spark of defiance began to glow. Fed by the embers of her humiliation and the quiet despair she witnessed in her peers, she couldn't articulate it, but a profound shift was occurring within her. The quiet endurance that had served her in the Japanese school was no longer enough. The pervasive injustice at Northwood demanded more than silent suffering. The catalyst came unexpectedly, not from a dramatic confrontation, but from a mundane school assignment. Mr. Henderson, the art teacher, a man whose artistic soul seemed to have been slowly crushed under Decker's thumb, assigned a project on personal expression through medium. The irony was not lost on Emily, or indeed, on many students who now instinctively avoided any form of overt self-expression. Most students submitted bland, formulaic pieces, devoid of genuine emotion, designed solely to avoid drawing Decker's attention. Emily, however, felt a strange pull, the memory of Akane shredding her sketchbook. The raw pain of that violation flashed through her mind, but this time it wasn't just pain. It was a defiant urge to reclaim what had been stolen. She considered making something safe, something innocuous, but the thought filled her with a profound weariness. This was her opportunity, however small. To push back, she decided to create a piece that spoke, not just for herself, but for the stifled voices around her. She chose clay, a medium that felt primal, malleable, capable of holding raw emotion. For days, she worked in secret, during late hours in the quiet art room, after most students had left, and even during lunch breaks when Mr. Henderson would mysteriously forget to lock the door. Her hands, usually precise and delicate, moved with a newfound urgency, kneading and shaping the clay, infusing it with her simmering frustration. She sculpted a series of abstract figures, each one faceless, hunched, and cloaked, their forms suggesting a universal posture of fear and resignation. But within each cloaked figure, she subtly etched a single, defiant gesture, a tiny, almost imperceptible hand reaching out, a head tilted slightly upward, a faint ripple of movement beneath the rigid exterior. It was a silent testament to the hidden resilience she saw in her peers, a subtle protest against the uniformity Decker demanded. The piece, titled Echoes of Silence, was completed with a somber, metallic glaze, giving the figures a cold, imposing presence. Yet the faint, defiant gestures provided a glimmer of hope. On the day of the art exhibit, Emily placed her piece among the dozens of muted, uninspired works. She braced herself for the inevitable, for the dismissive glance from Decker, for the judgment of her peers. But something unexpected happened. As Principal Decker made his rounds, scrutinizing each piece with a critical eye, he stopped at Emily's sculpture. His usual sneer tightened, his brow furrowed. He stared at the faceless figures, his gaze lingering on the almost invisible details of resistance. He couldn't quite articulate why it bothered him, but he sensed a subversion, an unspoken challenge to his authority. He opened his mouth, ready to issue a scathing critique, perhaps even to demand its removal. It was then that Mr. Henderson, who had been hovering nervously nearby, stepped forward. He cleared his throat, a sound that seemed unusually loud in the tense silence of the art room. "Principal Decker," he began, his voice tremulous but firm. "This piece, Echoes of Silence, is truly remarkable. It captures the essence of contemporary anxieties, the struggle of the individual spirit against oppressive forces, the subtle nuances, the implied defiance within the constrained forms. It's a profound commentary on the human condition." Decker turned, his eyes narrowing, ready to reprimand Henderson for daring to speak. But Henderson continued, his voice gaining a surprising confidence. "Indeed, it adheres perfectly to the rubric personal expression through medium. It expresses a powerful personal narrative without violating any explicit school rules." Of course, Henderson's gaze, though seemingly directed at Decker, flickered to Emily, a momentary, almost imperceptible nod of encouragement. It was a subtle act of solidarity, a tiny crack in the wall of fear that surrounded them. Decker bristled, but he was trapped. Henderson had framed the sculpture as a profound, if abstract, artistic statement, making it difficult for Decker to openly condemn it without appearing Philistine or worse, admitting his insecurity about its unspoken message. To attack it would be to acknowledge its truth, to reveal his own fear of its subtle power. He grunted, a frustrated sound, and moved on, his face a mask of barely suppressed rage. The students, who had been watching with bated breath, let out a collective sigh of relief. A ripple of whispers spread through the room. They understood. Emily's piece, and Henderson's brave, albeit indirect, defense of it, had opened a tiny fissure in Decker's suffocating control. Later that day, during lunch, Sarah approached Emily, her eyes wide with admiration. "Emily," she whispered, "that sculpture, it was incredible. It spoke to all of us." Other students, emboldened by Sarah's open praise, offered hesitant nods of agreement, their eyes reflecting a nascent hope. This small act of resistance, quiet and artistic, yet public, was a profound turning point. It wasn't a riot or a direct confrontation, but it was a declaration. It showed that even within the confines of Decker's tyranny, a spirit of defiance could exist, a silent rebellion that resonated deeply with those who felt similarly oppressed. Emily felt a surge of something akin to power. The experience had chipped away at her ingrained habit of silence, replacing it with a quiet, burning resolve. She had risked something, however small, and had not been crushed. More importantly, she had found an unexpected ally in Mr. Henderson, a testament that even within a corrupt system, there were individuals whose moral compass still pointed true. The public humiliation she had suffered was slowly transforming into a source of unexpected strength, fueling a resolve to reclaim not just her dignity, but the dignity of her entire school. The subtle echoes of silence were beginning to demand a louder voice. The air in Northwood High, perpetually thick with the principal's oppressive control, felt charged with an almost unbearable tension. Emily, navigating the halls, felt the constant sting of judgment, the subtle ostracization from her peers, and the careful avoidance from her teachers. The school felt like a pressure cooker, the lid trembling under an unseen force. Then, like a seismic shift, the tremor began. It started subtly. A murmur rippled through the main office, followed by an abrupt cessation of the usual administrative chatter. Then, a hush fell over the normally bustling hallways, a silence deeper than the one Decker typically commanded. Emily, passing by the main entrance, felt an inexplicable pull. She saw it then, a ripple of astonishment passing through the students congregated near the entryway, their eyes wide, some mouths agape, framed in the grand oak doors of Northwood High. A figure stood, silhouetted against the morning sun. It was Steven Seagal. He wasn't dressed in the casual attire parents usually wore for school visits. He wore a traditional dark-colored martial arts gown, its crisp fabric a stark contrast to the mundane school environment. His presence was not just physical, it was an almost tangible force, radiating a controlled intensity that immediately commanded attention. His hair, often pulled back, flowed freely, and his eyes, usually placid, held a deep, unyielding resolve. Students instinctively parted, creating a path for him, their gazes shifting from awe to trepidation. Steven Seagal walked into the school as if he owned it, his movements fluid and deliberate, an embodiment of the Aikido principles he had mastered: focus, adaptability, and the ability to neutralize threats with minimal effort. His eyes, piercing and direct, swept over the main hall, taking in the intimidated faces of the students, the watchful, nervous expressions of the teachers. They finally landed on Emily, standing small and vulnerable by a row of lockers, her uneven hair a stark testament to the violation she had endured. A flicker of raw anger, quickly veiled, crossed his features. He didn't rush to her. Instead, he simply nodded, a silent acknowledgement that spoke volumes. Emily felt a surge of something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in weeks: hope, sharp and exhilarating, mixed with a profound dread of the impending storm. Principal Ron Decker, alerted by the unusual quiet, emerged from his office, his face a mask of annoyance. "What is the meaning of this intrusion?" he demanded, his voice ringing with his usual authoritarian arrogance. He looked at Steven Seagal, a stranger in a strange outfit, and clearly underestimated the man before him. "This is a school, sir, not some dojo." Steven stopped, his gaze unwavering, settling on Decker with a chilling intensity. "My name is Steven Seagal," he stated, his voice a low, resonant rumble that seemed to fill the very foundations of the building. "And I am here for my daughter, Emily Seagal." The name hung in the air, a pronouncement that sent a shiver through those who recognized it. Decker's eyes, previously dismissive, widened almost imperceptibly. The smirk began to slide from his face, replaced by a dawning comprehension, then a flicker of something akin to fear. "Your daughter," Decker stammered, recovering quickly, though a nervous tremor was now evident in his tone. "Miss Seagal was disciplined according to school policy. The hair policy is in place for order, decorum." "Order," Steven interjected, his voice still low, but with an edge of steel that cut through Decker's bluster. "Decorum. You call public humiliation decorum. You call the mutilation of a child's appearance order." He took a slow, deliberate step forward. "I have just returned from a long international assignment. I arrived home an hour ago to find my daughter, a child of exceptional character and discipline, publicly shamed by you. And I find this school a prison built on fear." His words resonated. Students, emboldened by his presence, began to stir. Whispers turned into hushed murmurs. Mr. Henderson, the art teacher, stepped forward, his eyes fixed on Steven. "Mr. Seagal," he said, his voice surprisingly strong, "what happened to Emily was an outrage. And it's not just Emily." Decker whirled on Henderson. "Silence! Mr. Henderson, you are out of line." But the dam had broken. A brave junior, Maria, a usually shy girl, took a shaky breath. "He made me wear a dunce cap for a week for wearing mismatched socks," she blurted out, her voice trembling but clear. Another student, Mark, added, "He suspended my friend for a month because his shirt wasn't tucked in perfectly, even though it was a new shirt that didn't stay tucked." The stories, once suppressed by fear, began to spill out, a cascade of indignities and arbitrary punishments. Students found their voices, a quiet chorus of accusations rising in the hall. He made us stand facing the wall for an hour for chewing gum. He ripped up my drawing because it wasn't realistic enough. Decker's face flushed a deep crimson, a mixture of fury and panic. These are fabrications, lies, he bellowed, his voice losing its authoritative edge, replaced by a desperate, cracking sound. He lunged towards Maria as if to silence her, but Steven Seagal moved with a terrifying swiftness. Before Decker could take another step, Steven was there, his hand raised, not in aggression, but as an impenetrable barrier. His movements, honed through years of Aikido training, were economical and precise, designed to redirect and control, to neutralize threats with minimal force. He didn't touch Decker, but the sheer force of his presence, the controlled power emanating from him, stopped the principal dead in his tracks. "These are not lies," Steven said, his voice now a dangerous whisper that seemed to echo through the silence. "These are the voices of children you have terrorized, and I believe them." His gaze swept over the petrified teachers who stood by, paralyzed. "I understand fear, but I also understand complicity. The silent suffering you have overseen, the systemic abuse you have allowed to fester, ends today." A senior student, David, who had been quietly filming on his phone, stepped forward, his hands shaking but his eyes determined. "I have videos," he said, his voice cracking, "of him tearing up Leo's art, of him screaming at Mrs. Rodriguez in front of her class, of Emily." He held up his phone, the screen flickering with incriminating snippets. This was the evidence, raw and undeniable, a digital record of Decker's reign. The confrontation was no longer just about Emily's hair. It was a public reckoning, a dismantling of a system built on fear and unchecked power. Steven Seagal stood at the center of it, not as a vengeful father, but as a silent, formidable force of justice, compelling a corrupt system to finally confront its own ugliness. The witnesses were there, the evidence emerging, and the oppressive silence of Northwood High was finally, dramatically, shattered. The main hall of Northwood High, moments ago a suffocating chamber of fear, now vibrated with a volatile blend of shock and nascent hope. Principal Decker, caught in the harsh glare of both Steven Seagal's unwavering gaze and the damning video evidence on David's phone, visibly crumpled. His face, a landscape of arrogance just minutes before, contorted into a mask of pure terror. "This is slander," he shrieked, his voice thin and reedy, a stark contrast to his usual booming authority. He lunged, not at Steven, but at David, desperate to seize the phone, to erase the irrefutable truth it held. But Steven Seagal moved with the effortless grace of a master, intercepting Decker with a subtle shift of his body. There was no aggression, no violence, just a perfectly timed maneuver that blocked the principal's path without touching him. Decker stumbled, his momentum lost, and found himself suddenly off balance, facing away from David, effectively neutralized. The ease with which Steven controlled the situation sent a palpable shiver through the assembly. It was a demonstration of power far beyond any Decker had ever wielded, a chilling testament to mastery over brute force. As Decker struggled to regain his composure, the sound of sirens, faint at first, then growing steadily louder, pierced the strained silence from outside. Steven Seagal hadn't just appeared, he had prepared. A small, efficient team of school board officials and local police officers, already briefed by Steven's advance team and likely alerted by a concerned Mr. Henderson, or one of the braver teachers, entered the hall. Their arrival was quiet, orderly, yet devastatingly effective. The lead police officer, a stern-faced woman with an air of quiet authority, walked directly to Decker. "Principal Ronald Decker," she stated, her voice devoid of emotion. "We have received multiple reports concerning allegations of abuse of power, public humiliation, and systemic misconduct. We also have this evidence." She gestured to David, who, with trembling hands, handed his phone to the officer. The officer watched the video snippets, her expression hardening with each frame. Decker, his bluster completely deflated, tried one last desperate plea. This is an internal school matter. I was merely enforcing discipline. Steven Seagal stepped forward, his voice cutting through the hall like a sharpened blade. Discipline is about guidance, principle, not degradation. You created an environment where fear was currency, and dignity was a luxury. Your discipline broke spirits, rather than building character. His words were calm, but they carried the weight of unyielding truth, echoing the silent suffering of every student in the room. The school board representatives, faces grim, exchanged quick, decisive glances. One of them, a woman in a severe suit, stepped forward. Principal Decker, effective immediately. You are suspended pending a full investigation. Your keys, please. Her voice was cold, professional, leaving no room for argument. Decker, his face a mask of defeat, fumbled in his pockets, his hands shaking as he relinquished the symbols of his once absolute power. The police officer then formally placed him under arrest, citing multiple counts of assault, reckless endangerment, and conduct unbecoming of a public official, likely based on the testimony of the students regarding physical intimidation and the emotional trauma inflicted. As the handcuffs clicked into place, a collective gasp rippled through the hall. Decker, stripped of his authority, led away by the officers, was a pathetic figure. His head bowed, his once imposing presence reduced to nothing. The sight of him being let out, a handcuffed man, was a surreal and profoundly liberating moment for the entire Northwood High community. The departure of Decker seemed to unleash a torrent of suppressed emotions. Students, initially stunned, began to cheer, a wave of exhilarating release washing over them. Tears, not of sorrow but of relief and joy, streamed down faces. Emily, watching Decker's humiliating exit, felt a lightness she hadn't experienced in weeks. Her initial fury began to subside, replaced by a quiet sense of vindication. Sarah rushed to her, embracing her fiercely, murmuring incoherent words of pride and gratitude. Teachers, previously paralyzed by fear, now found their voices. Mr. Henderson, emboldened, approached the remaining school board officials, offering his own testimony and speaking passionately about the emotional damage Decker had inflicted. Other teachers, some visibly weeping, confirmed the students' accounts, their own complicity now replaced by a shared sense of liberation and regret. They spoke of threats to their jobs, of arbitrary performance reviews designed to keep them in line, of the oppressive atmosphere that had stifled their ability to genuinely educate. Words spread like wildfire. Parents, hearing snippets from their children, began to arrive, demanding answers, their initial anger morphing into outrage as the full scope of Decker's tyranny was revealed. Local news vans, alerted by anonymous tips, began to gather outside the school gates, their cameras poised to capture the unfolding drama. Northwood High, once a bastion of forced quiet, was now a nexus of frenzied activity, a symbol of systemic injustice finally brought to light. Steven Seagal, having ensured the immediate threat was removed, turned his attention to Emily. He embraced her, a silent, powerful gesture of comfort and protection. "You endured, Emily," he murmured, his voice thick with pride. "You endured, and you opened the door for justice." His presence had been the catalyst, but it was the collective courage, sparked by Emily's quiet defiance and David's quick thinking, that truly dismantled Decker's reign. The consequences unfolded swiftly. The school board immediately launched a full-scale investigation, promising sweeping reforms. The initial charges against Decker were just the beginning, with more expected to follow as the sheer volume of student and teacher testimonies mounted. The community, initially shocked, was now galvanized. Parent-teacher associations called emergency meetings. Local news outlets aired emotional interviews with affected students and their families. And a powerful dialogue about authoritarianism in education began to resonate far beyond the confines of Northwood High. The silence was broken, and the long, arduous process of healing and rebuilding, of ensuring true justice and genuine learning, had finally begun. The dust settled, But the tremors of change continued to ripple through Northwood High. With Principal Decker gone, a palpable sense of relief, like a collective exhale, permeated the air. Yet the wounds of his tyrannical reign ran deep, and the process of rebuilding hearts, minds, and trust was daunting. Emily Segal, though no longer under the immediate threat of public humiliation, found herself at the epicenter of this tumultuous aftermath. Her shorn hair was slowly, painstakingly growing back, but the emotional scars were far from healed. The initial days were a blur of interviews and consultations, school board officials, humbled by the public outcry and the irrefutable evidence, brought in counselors and external investigators. Emily, along with other affected students like Maria, Mark, and Leo, spent hours recounting their experiences, their voices, once silenced by fear, now carrying the weight of their collective trauma. Her father, Stephen, remained a constant, protective presence, guiding her through the legal and administrative labyrinth, ensuring her voice was heard and her well-being prioritized. He emphasized that this wasn't just about personal vindication. It was about systemic change, driven by this larger purpose. Emily realized that her story, far from being a source of shame, could be a catalyst for broader awareness. She decided to go public, with her father's support. She agreed to a televised interview with a local news station, opting for a sit-down discussion rather than a sensationalized expose. During the interview, Emily spoke with a quiet, dignified strength that belied her years. She described the day her hair was cut, not with tears, but with a stark clarity that conveyed the profound violation. She spoke of the chilling silence that had followed, the subtle ostracization, and the pervasive fear that had gripped Northwood High. Her voice, though soft, carried an undeniable resonance as she detailed the systemic nature of Decker's abuse, highlighting how fear had silenced both students and teachers. "It wasn't just my hair," she stated, her eyes fixed on the camera. "It was about control. It was about making us afraid to be ourselves." The interview struck a nerve. It aired during prime time and immediately went viral. Her calm composure, coupled with the horrific details of her ordeal and the mounting testimonies from other students, ignited a firestorm on social media. The hashtag Justice for Emily and #Northwood Voices began trending globally. Screenshots of Decker's smug face during the assembly were juxtaposed with photos of Emily's shorn hair. Fueling public outrage, news outlets across the country picked up the story, inviting educational psychologists and civil rights advocates to dissect the deeper implications of such unchecked authority in schools. Emily herself became an unlikely spokesperson. She wasn't seeking fame, but her innate authenticity resonated with people. She appeared on several online forums, participating in moderated discussions about student rights and the dangers of authoritarian leadership in educational institutions. She even started a personal blog. Initially hesitant, but encouraged by Sarah and Mr. Henderson on her blog. She wrote about her feelings, her struggles with anxiety, and her journey towards healing. She shared stories submitted anonymously by other students, creating a safe space for them to process their own trauma and contribute to the growing body of evidence against institutional abuse. Her posts were raw, honest, and deeply empathetic, quickly gaining a massive following. Her influence spread beyond the digital realm, inspired by her courage. Students from other schools began sharing their own experiences of arbitrary discipline and fear-mongering principles, demonstrating that Decker's reign was not an isolated incident, but a symptom of a larger problem within the educational system. Petitions for greater oversight of school administration and mandatory mental health support for students gained hundreds of thousands of signatures. Emily found herself invited to speak at local community meetings, where parents and educators listened intently, moved by her story and inspired by her resilience. The community, initially fragmented by fear, began to coalesce. Parent groups organized forums to discuss school governance and student well-being. Teachers, no longer under Decker's thumb, formed alliances to advocate for a healthier school environment. Even students, once isolated by their individual fears, found solidarity in their shared experience. They started small acts of reclaiming their school. Colorful murals appeared in previously drab hallways. A student-led initiative to revise the outdated dress code gained traction. And the cafeteria, once a silent mess hall, now buzzed with animated conversation and genuine laughter. Emily, at the center of it all, was rebuilding herself not just by healing her own wounds, but by becoming an architect of change. The girl who had once suffered in silence was now a beacon of courage, her story transforming from a personal tragedy into a powerful narrative for justice and systemic reform. She was no longer just Emily Segal, the victim of a tyrannical principal. She was Emily Segal, the voice of a generation demanding dignity and respect in their schools. The traction she gained on social media, the public platforms she embraced, were not about seeking glory, but about amplifying a critical message that unchecked power, wherever it manifests, must be challenged, and that even the quietest voice, when joined by others, can become a roar for justice. The momentum Emily had helped build was unstoppable. The story of Northwood High, once a local scandal, had escalated into a national conversation about accountability in education. The public outcry, amplified by Emily's unwavering advocacy and the burgeoning student movement, forced immediate action from the highest levels. Principal Decker, initially facing administrative suspension and preliminary charges, found his legal situation deteriorating rapidly. The sheer volume of witness testimonies, the irrefutable video evidence compiled by David, and new forensic audits of school accounts revealing questionable expenditures under Decker's tenure, painted a damning picture of corruption and abuse. A few months after the infamous assembly, the formal proceedings against Ron Decker culminated in a public trial that drew national attention. Emily, though no longer a child, was called to testify. She walked into the courtroom, her head held high, her hair grown back to a healthy, natural length, framing a face etched with a quiet resolve. She recounted the day her hair was cut, her voice clear and steady, devoid of overt emotion but brimming with an undeniable dignity. Her testimony, poignant and powerful, resonated deeply with the jury and the public alike. She spoke not just of her personal humiliation, but of the systemic fear, the stifled creativity, and the psychological toll Decker's reign had taken on an entire student body. Her father, Stephen, sat in the gallery, his presence a silent pillar of strength, his gaze fixed on his daughter with profound pride. The verdict came swiftly, guilty on multiple counts, including assault, child endangerment, and abuse of authority. Ron Decker, once the imposing tyrant of Northwood High, was sentenced to a significant prison term. The courtroom erupted in a wave of gasps and then a collective, liberating cheer that spilled out onto the courthouse steps. Justice in its purest, most tangible form had been served. The news flashed across every major network, a powerful message reverberating across the country: no authority, however seemingly absolute, could operate above the law and beyond accountability. Back at Northwood High, a profound transformation was underway. A new principal, Dr. Eleanor Vance, a progressive educator known for her empathetic approach and commitment to student empowerment, was appointed. Her first act was to hold a series of restorative justice circles, creating safe spaces for students and teachers to share their experiences and begin the collective healing process. The draconian hair policy was abolished, along with all other arbitrary rules that had stifled individuality. The school's atmosphere shifted dramatically, from one of fear to one of openness and respect. Student clubs flourished, diverse voices were encouraged, and teachers, liberated from constant intimidation, rediscovered their passion for teaching. The vibrant murals that had been a quiet act of defiance now adorned the hallways, symbolizing a renewed spirit of creativity and freedom. To honor Emily's courage and her pivotal role in bringing about this systemic change, the Northwood High community organized a special ceremony. It wasn't a somber affair, but a celebration of resilience and the power of collective action. The entire student body, faculty, parents, and numerous community members filled the newly refurbished assembly hall, a space that once held the painful memory of Emily's humiliation now vibrated with hope and solidarity. During the ceremony, Dr. Vance presented Emily with the inaugural Spirit of Northwood Award, a newly created honor recognizing students who exemplify courage, integrity, and a commitment to justice. Emily accepted the award with humility, her eyes scanning the faces of her peers, seeing not pity, but genuine admiration and a shared sense of triumph. Her best friend, Sarah, beaming, stood beside her, a testament to their unwavering bond. When it was her turn to speak, Emily stood at the podium, a figure of grace and quiet strength. She didn't dwell on the past or the pain. Instead, she looked out at the assembled crowd, her voice clear and resonating with newfound confidence. What happened to me, and to so many others here, was a profound injustice, she began, her gaze sweeping across the face of her liberated schoolmates. But it taught us something vital, that silence, while sometimes a shield, can also be a cage. That true courage isn't just about fighting, it's about speaking up. Even when your voice trembles, it's about standing together. Because one whisper, when joined by many, can become a roar that dismantles injustice, she continued. My father often taught me that true strength lies not in wielding power over others, but in mastering oneself and standing for what is right. We, as a community, stood for what was right. We refused to let fear define us. This award isn't just for me, it's for every student who whispered a truth, for every teacher who dared to care, for every parent who fought for their children. It's for all of us, for reclaiming our voices and our dignity. Emily's message was clear and powerful. The fight for justice requires collective action, unwavering courage, and a refusal to be silenced. She left Northwood High, not as a victim, but as a symbol of transformation. Her story, once a tale of humiliation, became an inspiring testament to the fact that even in the face of profound adversity, truth will prevail, and the spirit of a community can awaken, rise, and reclaim its power. The emotional echoes of that day would forever serve as a reminder that the loudest voice for change often begins with the quietest act of defiance, and that justice, though sometimes delayed, will ultimately find its way.